It is a Viva on the street update. It has been a while since I've been doing it. Some people have been asking, has the government gotten to me? Why am I not doing the Viva on the street updates? The government has gotten to me, but they haven't gotten to me. This is week 13 of François Legault's 4-week lockdown to flatten the curve over the holiday season so as not to overwhelm the hospitals, which was 1 year into the 2-week lockdown to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm the hospitals in 2020. April 9th is the day today. This curfew started on January 9th and was scheduled for 4 weeks to flatten the curve over the holiday season so as not to overwhelm the hospitals. We are now entering week 13. But things did happen. Thank you. Things did happen in the 13 weeks. At one point, our benevolent leader, François Legault, extended the curfew, because you will recall this started in January, before daylight savings time. This ended up extending so long that we hit daylight savings, which meant that it got lighter an hour later. And because it's all very highly scientific, François Legault said, well, it's getting later now, so maybe the science says we should extend the curfew. The science for a curfew, which, by the way, our own health director, Horacio Arruda, said there's no science to justify the effectiveness of a curfew to fight a virus. So setting that aside, because we did hit daylight savings time, benevolent leader François Legault extended the curfew to 9:30. I don't remember when that was, but it was well over 8 weeks into the 4-week curfew. Well, apparently the numbers now are so serious that François Legault is recalling the curfew back to 8 o'clock. In the dead of spring heading into the summer, François Legault is imposing a curfew where people cannot be outside of their houses after 8 o'clock, when what we need is fresh air, exercise, and mental and physical health. No, doesn't matter, science. The curfew has been rolled back to 8 o'clock as of April 11th, this Sunday. The dead of spring, longer days, kids, adults cannot leave their houses after 8 o'clock. I posted something to Twitter to the effect that, the government's emergency measures follow a seamless transition from reactionary to preventative to permanent. And this is a perfect example. I don't think it's going to be permanent, but we are into week 13 of a 4-week curfew. It starts off as reactionary. We got a big problem, we got to react. Then, when the problem is flatlined or resolved or under control, it becomes preventative. We have to make sure this doesn't get any worse. And then once it's preventative, then it's, well, we got to keep it this way. So your emergency government measure has gone from reactionary to preventative to permanent. And the irony is that the numbers today to justify rolling back the curfew from 9:30 to 8 o'clock in April, spring, when kids need to be out, when people need to be out, the numbers in the hospitals justifying the rolling back, as far as I can tell, are actually less bad than they were when the curfew was imposed in the first place. So let that sink in for a second. The numbers now, as far as I can tell, are better, if not no worse than, when the curfew was imposed for 4 weeks in the first place. And you have to appreciate what this means and the numbers that we're dealing with. We're dealing with several hundred people in hospital, a couple hundred in ICU, in a province of 8.5 million. That is such of an undue burden on our healthcare system that the government locks down 8.5 million people in curfew, or maybe, sorry, you know what, I don't want to be accused of spreading fake news. It's not the entire province. It's just Montreal, Laval, and other regions, which comprise basically half the population of the province, if not more. A few hundred, maybe 500-600 people in hospitals, a couple hundred in ICU, can somehow warrant locking down millions of people. Do you know what that is? That is punishing the citizenry for the incompetence of the government. That is punishing the citizenry for the lack of infrastructure of the government. You know what the real problem is? COVID is a problem. You know what the bigger problem is? The incompetent government that has set up a public healthcare system that is incapable of dealing with hundreds of people in hospital and hundreds of people in ICU. And then this morning, because I was looking to see what the ad rate was, the government ads running on public radio, I was listening to CJAD, Elias Makos on, I think it's on every morning, but I was just listening to it today randomly. And people are calling in, responding to Elias Makos, asking questions as to what, how we feel about this curfew measure. And the push and pull on public radio or on the radio was, between curfew and stricter curfew. And Elias Makos, he's a radio personality, he's got an opinion, he's entitled to it. His anecdotal evidence was, I saw people going into someone else's apartment, which was already illegal, at 5:30 in the evening. And so surely they're going to stay there past 8 o'clock. So we need these unconstitutional impositions, these restrictions of civil liberties to prevent people from gathering, which is already illegal, by the way, so as to possibly prevent the spread of this virus, which, by all accounts is a burden on the healthcare system, but sufficient amount of a burden to justify locking down a province of 8.5 million, arguable. And I call in and I say, it's nice that, you think that the existing laws, because there already are laws, you're not allowed meeting inside people's houses, and I have a problem with that from a constitutional and legal perspective to begin with, but you already have the laws in place. But now you want to impose an even more draconian, unconstitutional police state curfew measure because you think people aren't following the existing laws, so enforce more laws that are going to punish more people that will probably not have much of a deterrent effect on those who are not following the rules in the first place. And I said, we have a constitution for a reason. There are laws for a reason. There are checks and balances in place to ensure that we don't descend into what we have descended into. And his response after saying, I don't want to talk about the science of it, was, well, Premier David, you're premier, what would you do? And I said the same thing I said last year. What would I do? I would not lock down unwillingly. I would lock down the vulnerable. I would protect the vulnerable, and I would lock down the sick. And I would let the non-vulnerable and the non-sick, the people who need to live their lives, and the people whose society needs to live their lives in order to maintain the infrastructure to take care of those who get sick, I would let them live their lives. And then, the individual who didn't want to talk science then says, yeah, well, Premier David, our hospitals will then be overrun. So he went from not wanting to talk science and medicine to predicting the future based on scientific and medical predictions. And it's an amazing thing. Like, I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of them are much more left than I am. And privately, they have had it. They have had it because, everybody eventually has it when it affects them or their loved ones. The people who haven't had it yet, they're the people who are, I would say, better off now to some extent because there's a lot more security in relying on government monthly payments. And I say that without judgment. Just, it is objectively better off. This is the system, the employment insurance system makes it better off for some people, which is why some people just don't bother looking for work, because why work harder when you get paid something decent for not working? The other people who don't mind are the people who are extremely wealthy and are not affected by this at all. Or the other people who are supporting this are not affected by it because they're not affected by it. So what's so bad about it? Not a big deal. They work, they come home, they relax. Not people who are suffering because of this. Not people who have lost their businesses because of this. Not people who are trying to raise families, children, well-adjusted children because of this. But people have now gotten used to this as being the new normal. Having to think about whether or not you're allowed to leave your house at night without a dog. And even with a dog, if you can go more than a kilometer from your house. Because bear in mind, the rules are that you can leave your house after curfew, 8 or 9:30, depending on when you want to measure this, with a dog if you're walking the dog. Not for leisure, not for exercise. Your dog can get exercise, by the way, after curfew, but not a human. Your dog can get fresh air and his physical needs taken care of, but not a human. So let that sink in. But the thought is, okay, I can leave if I have a dog, but I still can't go more than 1 kilometer from my house. And now people are saying, well, that's the law. As if that's the justification for the new normal. It's not so bad. You can leave your house if you have a dog and you don't go further than 1 kilometer and you get back to your house and, whatever else the government says you can do. It's the slippery slope from reactionary to preventative to permanent. And people have gotten used to this as though this is somehow the new measure of a free and democratic society, when it can't be, it shouldn't, and as far as I am concerned, never will be. What else is the newest updates on the streets? Above and beyond what's going on in Quebec, talking about the new normal, talking about what is not the police state that Canada has become. In Alberta, the Pastor Coates, who was held in jail for a month and then released, and the charges dropped, by the way. So they held him in jail for a month. Then they subsequently released him after dropping all but one of the charges. There's a lot of people out there. They subsequently barricaded the church on Easter weekend because there was an unlawful gathering of worship on Easter weekend. And somehow this is not a police state. Somehow this is the new acceptable normal in Canada, barricading churches because they're not following health guidelines, when by all accounts, fewer people got sick at that church than got sick in ordinary society. Because apparently in all of the church membership visits, unlawful gatherings at that church, the Christ Church, is it called the Christ Church? The Grace Life Church. I think they had one positive case over the last year, which is statistically less than society at large. The police barricaded the church, and Lord knows what's going to happen there now. But somehow we have people saying we don't live in a police state where you can't worship freely, you can't leave your house freely, you have to be back in your house at a certain period of time. Reactionary to preventative to permanent. And at some point, the people will protest. I mean, people are starting to protest every weekend. The problem is, it doesn't seem there's a lot of people protesting, which really, you wonder if people are just too scared to protest, or they actually don't have a problem with this becoming the new normal. Yeah, and I have a high school buddy, actually, who lives in China now, and I was explaining this to him, and he says, we're not even doing this in China. This is over the top to people outside of Canada, and we are just living in too much of a bubble of sorts, a political bubble, to even see how the rest of the world is responding to this. Oh yeah. Where does it go? I might be, at some point in the near future, trying to get politically involved to make a change. We'll see. The legal system, it's unclear that it's ever going to do anything. We've had some updates in terms of the lawsuits. The EAQ, Entrepreneurs en Action de Quebec, who filed suit, their lawsuit, it was a safeguard order injunction dismissed. I've gone over that thoroughly. You know, they have a high threshold or burden of proof to overcome on a safeguard order thrown out. The judge basically said, curfew is not a problem. You haven't proven irreparable harm. We defer to the better judgment of the politicians. We take for granted and operate on the basis that the regulations in force are being enforced for the public good, and you have to overcome that burden to show that if they are in the public interest, that the damage they're causing is greater than the public interest they're protecting. And they didn't overcome that burden. And the judge even said when it came to face masks on children, 6 to 12 years old, even though we know the stats of communication of the virus through children, and we know the risks of masks on children, the judge said, verbatim, translating, the risk, however minimal it is, exists, and it's too much of a risk to take, so we're not even going to suspend the requirement of face masks on children in certain settings. So the courts are not going to do anything because the courts do not want to be the ones who feel that they are going to have blood on their hands if they overturn the decisions of the politicians. Nobody wants to make the hard decision, and so you have politically appointed medical experts advising the politicians who appointed them, and then you have politically appointed judges adjudicating on the legal disputes arising from the policy enacted based on the political appointed medical officers who are advising on the policies that the politicians who appointed them should enforce. So go figure out that incestuous circle of legal logic, and you'll understand why we are where we are. So it's a political decision. It's a political solution. And I may be part of that solution. So we'll see where things go. But I have been complaining about this for a long enough time to the camera, and people say, do something. I know what I think of the legal system for progress. It takes a judge with courage, and you can't blame anybody, but you can blame everybody. There don't seem to be that many judges with courage to make the hard decisions that will be unpopular in the current day, but popular down the line, and everybody just wants to take the decisions that are popular and easily justified in the current day, regardless of the long-term consequences they're going to have I'm in a t-shirt and shorts and some ugly socks. I started off doing these updates, Viva on the street, in hats, gloves, and a down jacket, where my biggest problem was my hands freezing as I did this. 4 weeks curfew to flatten the curve. 1 year into 2 weeks curfew, 2-week lockdown to flatten the curve. And we have gone from 2-week lockdown to flatten the curve to social distancing to mandatory masks, which have had to be recalled on at least one occasion because of graphene, toxic graphene in the masks, reported in the CBC. I did a video on it. We've gone from 2 weeks, mandatory masks, social distancing, restrictions on who you can have in your house, no Christmas. Gentlemen,
How are you?
I'm doing an update. Don't, you're not in it, I'll keep you all out of it. And I'm gonna have to end this before I pass by the house. That's the update. Stay strong, stay optimistic. Peace out. Peace out.